and it goes back to the time when Evelyn or Grandma would call me on the phone. Ken would answer, and he'd yell to me. At a time when I couldn't even afford to take girls out, he'd say, "Another one of your dames on the phone." And of course that certainly didn't set too well with your mother, but she knew with Grandma, but she knew he was pulling those things, so he was always pulling something. There was a big cannon up on the fort where we lived, and Uncle Ken used to collect beer cans. He'd throw a cherry bomb into the cannon and then set it off and then push a beer can in, and the cherry bomb would go off. The beer can would go out into space with both ends blown out of it and make a horrible noise, a whining noise, just like on a battlefield. And that was a place where all the lovers used to come and park their cars. And he'd scare them half to death, shooting off cherry bombs from the cannon on the top of the mountain. And then his other joke he used to pull was he'd tie two cars together, and when one couple would try to drive off, they'd tow the other car with them. So Uncle Ken, he had a good sense of humor, and he was quick-witted, and that's probably why he had survived the war, because he was a pretty fast thinker and knew how to handle himself.
Real well.
Yeah. How we doing, boy? Giving away all the family secrets?
What about the teddy bear?
The teddy bear was a bear that was probably 6 foot tall that belonged to Uncle Howard's wife. And it took up so much space in the house and it was getting old, they put it out in the trash. And I saw it out in the trash and decided I could have some fun with it. And so I put it on the bow of my boat like a figurehead. And he was sitting up there on the pulpit, and everybody got a big kick out of that. And one day we were out sailing and I saw Ken's boat anchored peacefully in Bristol Harbor, and a light bulb went off, and decided that maybe Uncle Ken would enjoy having this bear aboard his boat. And so we I took the bear over, and Alan Gilmore had the bear in one hand. He was jumping from one boat to the other, and he fell in the drink with the bear.
He let the bear go down.
And finally, he got up on the deck, and we tied the bear to the mast.
Oh.
And so that when Uncle Ken came out aboard his boat the next time, he'd see the bear there. Well, what happened was that the steward looked out and he says, Ken's car isn't here, and there's somebody on his boat. So the steward took the launch and went out, and he saw the bear there, and he decided that he wouldn't say anything. He knew that somebody had pulled a joke on Ken. So he left the bear there, and finally the word got back to Ken that there was somebody out on his boat. Ken came down, took the launch out, and there's the bear. And so he had some fun with the bear. He put him up in the pulpit and used it for a figurehead for a while. And then I think he put it in somebody else's automobile.
Any stories about your dad?
About my dad? Well, you know, he was a ship's captain. And he used to pilot ships during the war. And he'd pick them up in Nova Scotia and bring them along the sea coast as close to the shore as possible to try to avoid German submarines that were out there.
Mhm.
And they bring them from Nova Scotia down the coast of Maine, through the Cape Cod Canal, through Buzzards Bay, down through Long Island Sound to New York. And that's the way, and they'd load them up in New York and then take them back that way up to Nova Scotia. Then from Nova Scotia they were escorted across the ocean in convoys. So they used to wait until they had about 35 ships, and then they would have an escort of naval vessels to take supplies to Russia and to Europe and to England.
Mm.
And one time he was in convoy right off the coast here at Point Judith, and there were probably 30 or 35 ships in the convoy, and the ship just ahead of them got torpedoed, and it blew a big hole, and she was a coal collier, and she sunk rapidly, and most of the crew had to jump overboard. And the convoy commander ordered a course change, and the normal procedure is to, if you figure that the torpedo came from a certain direction, that you'd put your stern towards where the torpedo came from, so you made a poor target.
Mhm.
And so instead of having the full width of a ship, all you'd have would be the beam of the ship to hit, and plus the fact you were running away from the source of trouble. And so they ordered a course change that went in a northwest direction, but that course change forced my father to go right through the men who were in the water who had been torpedoed on the ship ahead of them. And as they went by the men, some of them were hit and drowned as a result of that. And Grandpa always felt badly about it, but there was no choice. That was standard operational procedure. They shut the engine off as they went through these men so they wouldn't get cut up by the wheel, but that was all they could do.
Mm.
So some of them drowned because they didn't have life jackets on. They didn't have time, they just got blown overboard. So that happened right off the seacoast. The German submarine was, a depth charge was dropped on it, and she was sunk right in Block Island Sound. She's still out there.
Mm.
And it's off limits to scuba divers because the feeling of the German embassy was that those men died for their country and they were heroes, and they didn't want them disturbed.
Mm. Any
You
stories?
like that story?
Yeah. Any stories about your grandfather that you can remember?
Well, I don't remember too much about my grandfather because he died when I was about 8 years old.
Mm.
But I do remember going fishing with him, and I remember he retired. He was a sea captain, and he retired in a nice home overlooking Penobscot Bay. He was up on a hill, and in front of his house he had a lifeboat that he made into a full rig ship, and had flowers growing up through the rigging, and people used to come from all around just to see his flower garden. And he used to go fishing and catch codfish, salt them, and then preserve them for the winter. And he used to survive on clams, codfish, and garden. He had a big garden, and they had potatoes in the garden. And during the summer months, he had to chop down trees in order to have wood to keep warm for the winter because
Mhm.
they didn't have oil heat then.
Right.
Okay?